you, everyone, and thank you for your patience. Again, my name is Charles Berman, and I am the receiver of taxes for the town of North Hempstead. I'm also a resident of Roslyn. I live in the Roslyn School District for the last 28 years, so every time I come to Bryant Library, you know, it's a homecoming. I feel like I'm home. And I want to thank the library for hosting this event. You know, I've been receiver of taxes since 2010, and the most common question I get all the time from our residents is, how do I lower my property taxes? Really, there are only two things that you could do. One is to make sure that you have all of the exemptions that you're entitled to by law. And in the fall, we do a very extensive presentation regarding exemptions. It leads right up to the filing period at Nassau County for property tax exemptions. The second thing, and the most important thing that you could do right now, is to file one of these challenges to your property's assessment. And that's what we're going to do today. We're going to actually explain how to file a challenge to your property's assessment, and we're going to explain the process and actually what's going on behind the scenes and what's driving all of these reductions. And you see these reductions year after year, whether the real estate market is crashing, as what happened during the recession and the downturn in the economy in 2009, 2010, or if the real estate market is on the rise, as we've seen really over the last 3 to 5 years. So either way, you're still seeing a lot of reductions from Nassau County regarding assessments, and that's what we're going to talk about today. As an overview, there is a calendar of events that happens every year regarding assessments. So the first thing that happens every single year is that Nassau County Department of Assessment publishes a new assessment roll. Now, most of you have heard that there's a freeze on this assessment roll, and that freeze has been since 2010, and that's true. The county has not done annual reassessment as they were doing in the 2000s. They don't actually do a reassessment of every single property, but the roll that they publish every single year is completely different from the roll they've published the year before, and that's because of the massive amount of these grievance applications that are being filed and are being actually approved and causing properties to be reduced. So every year there's a new assessment roll, and every year it's completely different. And every year that has an effect of changing your pro-rata share of the tax levies of the districts you live in. So even though, you know, they publicized and they say that there's a freeze on annual reassessments, that part's true, there's not a freeze on what happens to the assessment roll every year. So after the assessment roll is published, then it triggers this grievance period that we're actually in now. Anybody who owns property in Nassau County has a right to file a challenge to their property's assessment. And that's only, though, during the grievance period. So the grievance period every year is from the first day of business in January to the first day of business in March. So we're in that period now, and now is the time that you do have a right to challenge to the assessment that was recently published on January 2nd, 2017. After the grievance period closes, then the department that has the responsibility of receiving these grievances and acting on it, which is the Nassau County Assessment Review Commission, or they call it ARC, after the grievance period closes, then the Nassau County Assessment Review Commission actually starts reviewing all of the applications and acting on them. So they have a very long period of time to review these applications. Grievance period review period begins after the grievance period closes. So this year it'll be March 2nd, 2017, and it lasts all the way into the last day of March next year. So they have a very long period of time to review these grievance applications. For people who are filing a grievance to a residential property, which is a Class 1, it could be a 1, 2, or 3 family home property, a lot of these grievances get settled by September of the same year. But in some cases, it may not. But that's when they start issuing decisions from the Assessment Review Commission. So they have this very long period of time to review all of these grievance applications. And then once that period closes, which will be next year in March, the end of March, then anybody who got a decision from the Assessment Review Commission that they don't agree with has the right, if you have a residential property, Class 1 property, you have the right to file what's called a small claims assessment review. And you get to appeal the decision from the Assessment Review Commission. The way to do that, you have to wait until this review period closes, and then there's a 1-month window of opportunity in April every year to go to the county clerk's office and pay for a docket. It's a $30 fee to get a docket number to get on the calendar at Nassau County Supreme Court to have an actual hearing regarding your grievance. So that's a formal process. There's a hearing officer, and you would come in, and Nassau County Assessment would send people in to defend the assessment that they assigned. And then the hearing officer would make a decision on the case. But you can't get to that point unless you first file a grievance now. So nobody can just go file an appeal next year by getting a docket in April if they don't have a valid grievance on file now. But once, these cases get on the calendar, they start being heard, then later in the year, most of the assessments are settled. And that coincides with the time where budgets are starting to be developed. The first budgets, are the school budgets in the library. There's a vote the third Tuesday in May for the school and library budgets. So then those budgets have tax levies in them. Those levies go back to the Nassau County Department of Assessment. And then in the fall, the town and the county start creating all of their budgets with their tax levies, including all of the special districts in the town and the county. And then those budgets and tax levies go back to the Department of Assessment as well. And it's there that towards the middle and end of September that the Department of Assessment is able to take these final assessment rolls, take the levies out of the budgets, and multiply them by the proportion that each class of property is going to pay of the levies and figure out rates. So there are actually 4 classes of property in Nassau County. Class 1, as I mentioned, is residential property. That's 1, 2, or 3 family homes. Class 2 property are these big apartment buildings that are mostly co-ops and condos now. Class 3 property is all public utilities, and Class 4 property is all commercial property. So anybody who owns property in any class is entitled during this grievance period to file a challenge. The actual appeal to the decision is different whether you're Class 1 or you're Class 2, 3, or 4. So we're going to show you in a little while how to find out to make sure that you're a Class 1. And even if you live in a condo, it could be, most likely, it's going to be a Class 1 condo. I actually live in North Hills, in the only condo community that's in the Roslyn School District, and we're Class 1 condos. So once this assessment roll gets to the end of September, back to the Department of Assessment, and they're able to create rates, and then they're able to create tax rolls, then those tax rolls come to me, and we're able to actually print tax bills and mail them to you. So, you can see the way this calendar is working. This assessment roll that was set January 2nd, 2017, is first going to be used to create tax bills in October of 2018. That's the 2018-2019 school tax bill. And then the same assessment roll will be used for the 2019 general tax bill. So that's really what you would, if you're filing a grievance right now, that's what you're challenging. You're challenging the assessment for those bills. For the coming school bills, the next tax bills that are going to come from my office, October of 2017, that's the 17-18 school, and the 2018 general, those assessments were based on what was set in January 2016. So if you filed a challenge last year, your assessment might be changed or reduced based upon what you filed, and it'll affect this coming school tax bill and then general tax. But if you didn't file last year, then you can't do anything regarding your assessment that's going to be on the next upcoming bills. What you're actually challenging now are the bills that are going to come in 2018, 2019. One thing that we didn't show on the calendar is a program that the counties established after they started freezing annual reassessments. And that program they call the Settlement Conference. So once the Assessment Review Commission starts issuing decisions, you get a letter from them. You actually get a written letter. And that's true whether or not you file using the paper application or you file online, which we're going to show you how to do both today. But either way, you're going to get a decision in writing from the Assessment Review Commission. It's going to come in the mail, and you're going to decide if you accept it or reject it. And you're going to have to send it back to them. So if you get a reduction, you may accept it, send it back to them, then the case for that year is closed. If they basically, the decision says they're not going to change your assessment, and you don't accept that, or they offer you something that you don't like and you don't accept, you could send back to them that you don't accept the decision. So the Assessment Review Commission and the county has been very interested and they've been very aggressive at wanting to settle all of these grievances, these challenges, before these assessment rolls become finalized and they're actually converted to tax bills. The big reason is because once the bills go out and people are billed for a certain amount, if the cases are settled after the bills go out and the property owners pay their taxes, then the county actually has to reduce the assessment, recalculate the bill, and refund the difference between what the person was billed and what they should have been billed with the reduced assessment. So that creates a big liability. And there's actually been a very big backlog of that. It's a big liability to the county. So they've been very aggressive in trying to settle all of these grievances before these assessment rolls actually become tax bills. So part of their program in place now is if somebody rejects an offer, they're interested in contacting them, and we're going to show you there's a part on the application where you indicate who the representative is, and if you're doing it yourself, pro se, you're the representative, they're going to want to contact you. And even we've had cases where people were offered zero by the Assessment Review Commission. They sent back their letter saying they don't accept it, and the county, really didn't want the people taking the next step going to small claims assessment review. So they called them anyway, and they actually settled for something lower than what they were assessed for. If you're offered a reduction and you decline it, you're absolutely going to be contacted by them. And these settlement conferences are almost always by telephone, but they can be in person as well. What we just found out recently is that they've kind of curtailed the settlement program. So it used to be that anybody who denied whatever the decision was, they would most likely get contacted by the Assessment Review Commission regarding their denial. So now we know that when people are getting offers of a lower assessment, if they deny it, they're going to get contacted, but we're not sure if everybody's going to get contacted. In the past, yes, even people who got a decision that said we're not changing your assessment, they were contacted as well. But we'll have to see what happens regarding the settlement program. It hasn't ended, but they may have curtailed it. So anyway, regarding the grievance process, there is some basic minimum information that you have to have if you want to go forward and file a grievance application. We're going to go over that minimum information, but we're also going to show you how to get all of the information that the county publishes regarding your property. And there are actually two different websites involved because there are two different departments at the county that are involved regarding this whole process. So I mentioned that All of the grievance applications are filed at the Nassau County Assessment Review Commission. That commission is considered, it's independent from the Department of Assessment, and it is considered a quasi-judicial body. They do have the power to make these judicial decisions regarding assessments. So the minimum information that you need to have is you need to know what is this value that the county's assigned to my property. And if you have a Class 1 residential property, it's going to be a market value assessment. So you need to know what that value is. The easiest way to find that is that the county is now sending out these notices of tentative assessment. They have to send those out every year. So those have started to come in the mail. Some people have received them, some people haven't. If you haven't received it, we're going to show you how to look it up online. But on that notice of tentative assessment is going to tell you what the value is that was assigned to your property. And again, if you have a residential property, it's based on a market value. So you do need to know what that number is. I mentioned, you saw on the calendar that the filing period we're in now, it's very important. It started January 2nd. It will end March 1st, 2017. And in order to get a grievance application in, you have to get it in by the final date. Before challenging your assessment, you are going to want to check information regarding your property if you have access to a computer and the internet. So the first website that we're going to talk about, that we're going to show you, is the Nassau County Department of Assessment's website. That's been around a long time. It has an address, an internet address, www.mynassauproperty.com. You're going to need to know that website. And also, the Department of Assessment does have a phone number where they could be contacted, and their direct number is 516-571-1500. A couple of other things regarding this process that you should know. Number one, you can file these things pro se. You can represent yourself. You don't need to have an attorney to file a grievance or a property tax reduction consultant. If you've hired somebody in the past, last year or in previous years, you may have signed up for multiple years. So if you wanted to go ahead and file this by yourself, you would have to notify them in writing and also notify the Assessment Review Commission in writing. It's very important, though, not to have two filings in any calendar year. So you don't want to hire somebody to file for you and then file yourself, or you don't want to hire two different companies or two different attorneys to file for you. That creates a duplicate filing situation, and then the applications actually go to the back of the line, and the whole thing has to get sorted out as to who the actual representative is before the grievance application can go forward. So you want to make sure that you only have one application being filed in any calendar year. So last year I mentioned that there were massive amounts of appeals. Last year, over 185,000 property owners appealed with the Assessment Review Commission. And certainly you don't want to be at the back of that line. But what you should know is that the Assessment Review Commission could really do just one of two things. One, they could look at your application and then, because of all the circumstances, decide to reduce your assessment, or they could basically decide not to reduce your assessment, but they can increase your assessment if you file one of these grievance applications. Also, you should know that there's no fee to file one of these applications. I mentioned that to do the appeal, you have to go to the county clerk and get a docket number. There is a fee for that, it's $30. But to file a grievance application with the Assessment Review Commission, there's no fee. Anyway, this is also the period where if somebody felt that their property's in the wrong class, and I explain what the 4 classes of property are, you're going to look and you'll see what class your property's in. But if you think that your property's in the wrong class, you might say class 2, and or you think you should be in class 1, This is a time to appeal that, and also it's a time to appeal if you got a decision from the Department of Assessment regarding an application for a property exemption. So if the Department of Assessment denied your application for a property exemption, this is a time to file the appeal for that too. And the reason why we're bringing that up is because there are actually different forms for these appeals. So if you're filing the paper application, you want to make sure that you're using the correct form. It should say AR1. So we've handed out the forms. They're the white pieces of paper. And you can see that the application is pretty simplified. It's a pretty simple application for someone to file. And you really need to know just a few things to file a valid grievance. But you do want to make sure you have the AR1 form. That's for 1, 2, or 3 family homes on paper. Online, they combine all the 4 classes of property, but if you're filing by paper, make sure you have the AR1. AR2 is for the other classes of property, the class 2, 3, and 4 properties. And AR3 is for anybody who's challenging their class or they're challenging a decision on an application for an exemption. So as you're going forward and you're doing this, if you decide to do this yourself, and you have questions regarding the AR1, you actually can call the Assessment Review Commission too. And they have a direct number. We're putting it up now. It's 516-571-3214. And they have their own website as well. Now, we handed out a yellow sheet, and that yellow sheet has to do with the Assessment Review Commission's website, and we're going to explain their website. We're going to also show you how to file a grievance application online. But you can contact both the Department of Assessment or the Assessment Review Commission. Also, you can see that it's just a 2-page application. There's only 6 parts to it. I'm going to explain in a little while that some of the parts are optional. There is only some basic information that has to be on the application. But if you decide, if you have information that's relevant to your case, to your grievance regarding your property, and you decide you want to add more information that's not being asked on this application, you can do that. So you can file attachments to your application. You have to make sure, if you're filing more than 1 page, that on every page you put the tax year that you're filing for. The tax year is on the AR1 as well. So the tax year would be 1819 school. But you want to make sure you put the tax year, and you also have to make sure on every attachment that you put your section, block, and lot. So section, block, and lot is, you need to know that. Every property has a unique parcel ID in Nassau County, and it's broken out by section, block, and lot. Now, if you live in a condo like I do, there's also 2 other numbers. There's a CA number and a unit number. But you do need to know your section, block, and lot, and we're going to show you how to find it. So before you begin, I've mentioned 2 things you need to know. You need to know, what is this value? In the case of a residential property, what is this market value the county's assigned to my property this year? Because that's the number you're challenging. And you need to know your section, block, and lot. The third thing you're going to need to have in order to do this is your own estimate of market value. And it has to be lower than the market value the county's assigned to your property to file a valid grievance. So if they're valuing your property at $500,000 and you put down on your application $500,000 as your estimate, then your application is going to be disqualified. Your estimated value has to be lower. So there are several ways you can come up with an estimated value. The first way, we're going to show you later in the presentation actually how to use the county's sales locator to look at actual sales that are recent, let's say within the last 18 months, for homes that are similar to yours. So that would be one way to find sales. Another way to find sales If you know somebody in the real estate business, a broker, an agent, somebody who has access to multiple listing services and sales, things like that. You might have other sales that the county doesn't have on their Assessment Review Commission website. But if you know of sales in your neighborhood of homes that are similar to yours, and you want to compare certain very important factors like the model, the year it was built, the area of living space, the lot size, things like that, and the condition, things like that. If you know of sales in your neighborhood, on your block, on neighboring blocks, in your greater development, even in your school district, if you know of homes that are similar to yours that have been selling for lower than you're being valued, that's really great evidence that you're overvalued. And also, you could use that as a basis, as a starting point for coming up with an estimated value, lower sales. At this point, it's going to be very hard to find lower sales. But I'm going to show you, as we go, really what the basis for these grievances are. It's shifted from lower sales to something else. And we're going to show you the whole thing and why this is, properties are still being reduced. But lower sales would be one way to find your home's estimated value. A second better way right now, as I said, that the county's been very aggressive in the last 5 years at reducing a lot of these challenges. Some years where they reduced 90%. Some years where they've reduced in the 70s, 72, 74%, but they've been very aggressive. And I also mentioned that there have been a large number of these filings. So that would mean that in every single neighborhood, there are a lot of people who've gotten reductions. So what you can do is, we're going to show you how to look on the Nassau County website. What you can do is look at other properties that are similar to yours, and you're going to want to look at what their assessments are. Because this is the whole point. If in your neighborhood, or in the Roslyn School District, if you live in Roslyn, if there are a lot of homes that are similar to yours that right now are valued much less than you're valued for, you're paying a much higher portion, pro rata share, of the tax levy, including, the school tax levy, which, in Roslyn we have a lot of taxes. So you want to really, the purpose of doing this every year is to make sure that you're at parity with your neighbors who have homes that are similar to yours, because the county's only been acting on the assessment roll and only been reducing assessments for the filers. Everybody else who hasn't done anything, mostly because they look at the market value and they have some idea what the real estate market is, and they're somewhat lower than what they could sell their house for, they don't feel like they have to do something. But the real key to this is, what are the other assessments in your neighborhood? And if you find a lot of them are a lot lower, you can use that as a reference point for coming up with your lower estimated value. But, the average reductions that these homes have been getting for the last 5 years have brought them down, at least 20% from where they were when they were frozen, and in some cases they're 35% lower. But if you're going to, we're going to show you. We're going to show you. But what you want to do is come up with a reference point, and looking at other assessments is a very good way to do it. The third thing you could do is you could just do what the professional attorneys and property tax reduction consultants do. These firms, there are 6 or 7 of them. And as you know, we get bombarded, especially this time of year, or leading up to this time of year, with solicitations. They want to sign you up, but they want to charge you anywhere from 50 to 40% of whatever you save. And the average is around 45% right now. So that's a lot of money. And they basically, they want to sign you up, and they do sign up a lot of people, and many of these firms have 21, 23, 26,000 clients. So they don't look at each one and do an assessment and a market value assessment for each property and come up with a lower estimated value and then submit it. What they do is they just take all the market value assessments for their clients and divide by 2. So they always submit an estimated value that's 50% lower than whatever the county is assessing the property for. And there's a reason why they want to come in so low. Because when this thing gets settled, they want to make sure that they're lower than whatever the case could actually be settled for. Because the county, the Assessment Review Commission, will never reduce a property from the market value assessment lower than the estimated value that you put on your grievance application. So in the case of a home that's $500,000, if you put down $480,000, you're going to see in a little while when I show you an example, if you haven't done anything, that $500,000 home right now could probably be settled for a little bit higher than $400,000. But if you put down $480,000 as your estimated market value, they can never go below $480,000. So you do need to have an estimated value. It does need to be lower than the market value that's assigned to your property. It should be at least 20% lower, and in some neighborhoods it probably should be 35% lower. Or you could just do what the attorneys do and divide by 2, but it does have to be lower. Anyway, yeah, I'm going to stop for questions in a little while before we go on. But there are 2 ways basically to file your application. One is if you're doing the paper application, the best way to do it would be to make a copy of it and to bring it in person. Now the Assessment Review Commission is receiving, they've set up shop at the Nassau County Department of Assessment, and that's at 240 Old Country Road on the 4th floor. So you would go there, and the best thing to do would be to make a copy of your application, bring it up there, they'll stamp in the original, they'll stamp in your copy, and you'll have a receipt that you filed. That's what you want. You want an acknowledgement that you filed. You can also do the paper application by mail, but if you're doing it by mail, you absolutely have to use tracking. So you want to do it with at least those green stickers from the post office and get a tracking number, but you could do a priority mail or return receipt requested. But you want to have a receipt that you filed a valid grievance application. The county does not send out receipts, and we know of cases where people have filed and then they never heard from the Assessment Review Commission or gotten a decision where they've called up and you know, the county doesn't have any record of them ever filing. So, you know, things do get lost in the mail. We hear that from time to time from taxpayers, but there's nothing we could do unless we have a valid envelope with a postmark on it. So, anyway, if you're doing paper, you can either bring it in person, which is really the best thing to do. If you can't get there, then make sure you mail it with tracking. And you want to make sure if you're mailing it that it's postmarked at the counter at the post office by March 1st, 2017. Now, as I said, there are 3 things you need to know. 1 is the market value that's assigned, 2 is your section, block, and lot, and 3 is your estimated value. So you can find both of those, 2 of those 3 things on your notice of tentative assessment. If you don't get this in the mail in the next week or 2, that might mean there's a problem with your address. The parcel might be right, the value might be right, but they might have something wrong with the address, like the zip code or something. So we're going to show you how to find your notice of tentative assessment on the website. But for everybody who gets it in the mail, well, the first thing you can see is the address. If you get it in the mail, it's going to come in a window envelope, so the address is okay. The second thing you're going to see, it's going to say section, block, and lot, and it's going to be printed as a string of numbers. That string is important if you're actually going to file this online and use the Assessment Review Commission's website. That's the way the computer reads section, block, and lot. So the first 2 numbers in that string is a section. The next 3 numbers is a block, then there's a space, and the next 4 numbers is the lot, and then there's a 0 for the computer. But it's good to hold on to this, especially if you're going to file your grievance application online. You're going to need to know that string of numbers. We're going to show you, other ways to find your section block and lot, but it's on this notice of tentative assessment, and it's printed out the way you have to input it into the computer. This also tells you what class you're in, so it'll tell you if you're a Class 1 property, it'll say Class 1. In the middle of the notice of tentative assessment, it'll tell you the market value that the county's assessing your home for. It also says level of assessment will always say 1/4 or 1%, and then it'll show that fraction of the market value. That fractional level of assessment is the taxable assessed value. The bottom value, where it says tentative assessed value, that's the taxable assessed value. That's the value that's actually used on the tax rolls and will appear on your tax bills. That's what you're being taxed on. You're being taxed on a fraction of your market value. So those numbers are there. But you can also find section block and lot if you get a tax bill directly from me. You'll see it on your tax bill. So if you do get a tax bill from me, you got your school tax bill in October, your general tax bill recently, beginning of January, you could find on your tax bill your section block and lot. And again, if you live in a condo, you're going to see 2 more numbers that are going to say CA number and unit number. So you do need to know your section block and lot. So I'm going to go over a few parts of the application, and then I'm going to stop for some questions, and then we'll move on, and then we'll get to the Assessment Review Commission's website itself. We're going to do both websites, but it is a basic information application, and the first part, Part A, is mandatory. So the first thing they ask for is your section block and lot. So you put that in, and then you put in the property address of the property you're filing the grievance for. And it's very important, make sure you provide the complete mailing address, including the city, state, and zip code. So you put the property address in, and then you'll put in the name of the owner. So whatever name is on the deed, that's the name you're going to want to put on that line. So if the property's in 2 names, you put that on the line. If it's in 1 name, if it's held jointly, husband, wife, put that on the line. If it's held just in 1 name, you put that on the line for owner applicant's name. Now, if the property is in a trust or a life estate, then underneath that, there's another line for other owners' names. So you put the name of the trust or the name of the life estate. But that completes the whole section. You do need all the information, but it's basically very straightforward. Part B has to do with your estimated value. So remember, number 1, it has to be lower than the value the county's assigned to your property, your market value. The county can never go lower than the number you put in, and it has to be there. If you leave out Part B, then the whole application gets thrown out. So Part B has to be filled in. Part C has to do with you're telling the Assessment Review Commission who's representing the filer, the grievance. So if you're doing this yourself, you click Self, and you put in your name and your address, and you want to make sure that you put in all your telephone numbers where you could be reached, and also your email address. That's basically for them to be able to get back to you for the settlement conference. So you want to make sure that all of that information is included. So that's all very important. You have to do Part A, B, and C, but it's very straightforward. Part D has to do with the inventory that's on your property. Now, the inventory that's on your property are all the factors that determine what your assessment was, what your market value assessment was when the county was doing annual reassessments. The way they did annual reassessments was they compared your property as a subject to properties that sold recently within the last 15 months in your assessment neighborhood that they established. And what they were looking in sales were properties that were similar to yours And the similarity had to do with the inventory on your property. So they would make adjustments for the differences between the properties, and then they would come up with some average for the subject in every single sale. And then through a process of a regression analysis, they would come up with a final market value and assign that to the property. So the basis for the assessment that you have that's been frozen since 2010, the basis for your assessment has to do with your inventory. And we're going to show you, when we show you how to get on the county website, one of the things we're going to show you is how to look up your inventory. Now everybody, if you have access to a computer, you really need to do this. Because when the county started doing reassessments, if you remember in the early 2000s, there was a court case and the county lost. Somebody sued saying that the assessments weren't fair. It was based on a 1938 cost system, and the county agreed to do a reassessment in the settlement, and that's how, you know, we began annual reassessment. They didn't have the personnel to reassess the whole county at that time, and there's 465,000 properties in the county. You know, they were given a year to do it. So what they did was they took the inventory of every property. It was on something called the property record card. These were actually, you know, they had been inputted into a computer system, but the actual record cards were actually index cards with all the information about each property written out about it. But they took the data, they took all of this information and they input it into their system so they could do the mass reassessment. And in transferring the data in cases, some mistakes were made. So if a mistake was made on your property, it would still be there unless you found out about it, knew about it, and went to the Department of Assessment and had it corrected. So there are certain very important factors on this inventory. One is the area of living space. That's probably the most important thing. One is lot size. One has to do with the year it was built. One has to do with the model of your house. One has to do with the condition of your house. They also indicate whether you have central air and heat or just central heat. Certain things like that. So you're going to actually look at your inventory. If you have a mistake, the first thing you're going to do is you're going to put it down in Part D. That's what Part D is for. Part D is to correct any errors that have to do with your inventory. You don't want to fill this out unless you have a mistake that's adversely affected your assessment. So for anybody doing a grievance and going through this whole process, if you're a new owner and you bought your home a year and a half ago and you paid $600,000 and it's on the assessment roll right now for $450,000, you don't want to fill out the first line saying you bought the home a year and a half ago and you paid $600,000. That doesn't help your case. The whole point in doing this is that, you know, you want to end up with a lower value, and you might be probably justified in doing this, especially if you haven't done it consistently over every single year for the last 5 or 6 years, because of the unevenness in the whole assessment roll. So even if you're at $450,000, you bought your home for $600,000 a year ago or a year and a half ago, it could be that everybody else is at $350,000 with a home that's similar to yours. So you want the parity. You need to do this to get it adjusted. But you don't need to fill in all these questions in Part D. In fact, you shouldn't fill in any of it unless it's relevant to your property record card and you find a mistake. Another thing that's on the property record card has to do with location factor. So there are properties that have negative location factors. It should be in the system. What a negative location factor is, if, you know, as you know, there are residential property districts next to commercial property districts. If your home is the last home in the residential district and your neighbor is a factory, that's a negative location factor. If your home is on a busy 4-lane street with a double yellow line, that's a negative location factor. Also, you know, there are homes that where the backyard abuts up to the Long Island Railroad, where there are big, I'm not talking about telephone poles, I'm talking about those big lipo power line poles, high power, high voltage poles that are behind people's homes. Things like that, those are negative location factors. If you have something like that, it should be on your property record card. If it's not, Part D is where you want to correct that. But there's 2 steps to this. One is it's relevant to your grievance and it's going to help your case, but you also have to go back to the source, to the Department of Assessment, and you have to get them to correct it. And in some cases, you know, you may actually want a field inspection. So if they have your home where your area square footage is doubled, you know, you may be able to go back and get it corrected by showing them surveys and architectural plans and things like that, but it may require them to come and measure and actually look at it. But you would want them to do it in that case. I did mention a couple of things about filing these grievances, but I didn't mention that it can't trigger a field inspection. So by doing this, you don't open yourself up to any kind of inspection from the county. Anyway, so Part D has to do with your property's inventory, which we're going to show you in a little while, you know, where it is online. But Part D is also where you would put in other factors. So anything not asked on this application that I've mentioned, you would put that in here. So if you have an engineer's report or an architectural report regarding your property that would actually reduce your market value if you went to sell it, you would want to put that information in here. And you would also, if you have a lot of attachments, you would just write in where it says on the bottom of Part D, other facts, you would write C attachments. But again, you just have to make sure on every attachment you put the tax year and you put your section, block, and lot. If it's more than one page, you have to do that on every single page. So before we actually show you the websites, and we're going to start with mynassauproperty.com, I know I've already given you, a lot of information in the overview. If anybody has any questions right now, up until everything I've said, we'll stop for a few questions. If you have questions about things I haven't said yet, just wait. Yes, sir.
First of all, a compliment. You've given tons of information, and I don't think you have any cheat sheet notes up there, so you certainly know what you're talking about. I appreciate your time. Can you just explain the 30-day window when you file the SAR?
SCAR. Yeah.
When does that 30 days start and end? Because seems like...
For this assessment period, so this is the assessment roll that was published January 2nd, 2017. So for this period, that window of opportunity to file a SCAR doesn't open up until the review period closes. So the Assessment Review Commission has this long period of time, starting March 2nd of this year up until March 31st of next year, to review all of these grievance applications. After that period closes, then the opportunity to file an appeal to any decision you got that you don't agree with opens up for 30 days. So you essentially have the month of April every year.
Let's say that if they go through my process quickly and I get their decision in 6 months before that ending date, does my clock start at that point when I get the notification or when they make the decision?
All right, well, once you get your decision, you have to notify them back in writing whether you accept or decline. Okay. So there's a very short period of time to respond. And we know of people who actually got reductions, but they didn't respond by the deadline, and then the Assessment Review Commission didn't accept their form because they missed the deadline. But your clock to file a small claims doesn't start until a year from now in April. But at some point, when you send back your letter and you decline, especially a lower offer, they're going to want to call you and try to settle the case before you ever get to SCAR. They've always, they've been trying to stop people from going to SCAR. One thing that you should know about that, and I thank you for bringing the question, is that we get all these solicitations from these attorneys and these firms that want to represent us. You definitely don't need to hire them to do this, but what they never tell you when they're trying to solicit you is that you could file on your own, but if you're still, unsatisfied in a year from now, you could hire somebody to represent you just at SCAR. So they never ever advertise that. So you could do both. You could file on your own, and then in the end, if you don't get a settlement, you don't get a settlement conference, and you still think that you have a valid grievance, and you want to file an appeal, you could hire somebody at that point just for SCAR. So, that's something that they don't advertise. Yes.
As far as negative factors affecting location, would lines from LIPA that go across my property would that be something I could note? Because I've asked LIPA to remove them several times, year after year, and they failed to do anything about it.
Lines from LIPA could, depending upon the situation, and if they're the high power lines, not telephone lines, but if they're the high power lines, it definitely could be included as a negative location factor. Also, there are environmental, factors. There are people, as we know, live in Bethpage. They're affected by the Grumman plume. A lot of those homes don't right now have negative location factors, but they should, and that's a valid grievance. So there are certain environmental things, such as high power voltage lines and toxic plumes that are negative, and should reduce your market value. Yes.
I don't find it a negative, but is a park considered a negative?
A park? No.
To me, it's not.
Yeah, no, that one, no, I never saw a reduction
Because
on a
I
park.
back the Fine Arts Museum,
Right,
and
How about a school?
right. We're adjacent to Christopher Morley Park, so if you end up getting, let me know.
I'll let you know.
Yeah, let me know.
How about school? Like school,
No.
there's a noise?
No. Church, school, temple, no. Yes.
There's a handout about Cold War veterans. Is there a special application for that?
Yeah, there is an application for Cold War veterans, and if you actually get the Cold War veterans exemption, then now the state just recently passed a law to allow that exemption to also be on the school bill. But yeah, there is an application. We might have them with us today. If not, we could get it for you. But I have someone from my office in the back that you could speak to about that. Yes, sir.
You've spoken mostly about residential, but a lot of what you've said, can that be applied to its commercial properties?
Yes and no. Some of the rules regarding grievances apply to all the properties, but commercial property is the way it's assessed is it's based on this capitalization and net income. So there are certainly other things that somebody who owns commercial property would have to submit regarding income. As you know, you might have read recently that the county is imposing harsh fines on commercial property owners who are not filing their income and expense reports. And actually, a judge just put a restraining order on those fines. But so there are certain things regarding income that I'm not getting into for commercial property that you would need to know. Anyway, yes.
In this Cold War veterans thing, does that get put into other facts in Part D?
No. Okay. Exemptions are completely separate from what we're talking about assessments. So it's a completely separate process, and it can. But It's certainly something, if you're eligible for it, should apply for it and need to get it. Yes?
We successfully grieved, and I was just wondering, you have to keep doing it every year?
Yes. So my advice is, if you've been successful, that you should just keep doing it to kind of stay on the curve or possibly ahead of the curve. And I'm going to show you, what's happening every single year in a little while. Anyway, just to move on, one more question.
Would a sign that says sharp curve ahead affect your, the taxes?
Sharp curve ahead? I don't think so. I don't think so. Okay. Yes.
So the best way is to take all your exemptions. Is there any list of exemptions that are qualified anywhere?
We have a brochure that basically has all the property exemptions, and also it's on my website. If you go to my website at the town of North Hempstead, you go to Receiver of Taxes, just go to exemptions, and you'll see the whole catalog of exemptions. Anyway, we want to move on to the actual county website, mynassauproperty.com. So this is the website of the Department of Assessment, and there's some very valuable information on it. So anybody that has access to a computer, you need to be able to get on mynassauproperty.com. So it used to be very simple and straightforward to get on this website. You just actually go to the website, and then a search screen would come up, and you just put in the address, the property you're looking for, or if you knew the section, block, and lot, you'd put that in. But now the county's actually turned the management of this website over to a vendor, and they've increased the security. They basically said as a precaution against data mining from robot computers and hackers and things like that. So there's actually a very annoying security part to this beginning of this website, where they'll show you pictures and you have to identify. They'll show you like 4 pictures and you have to say which 3 pictures are the same and which one's not the same. And then they'll show you some letters and you have to type those letters in, and then they'll show you a word in an elongated script, and you have to try to figure out what that word says and then type that in. So it's all, very difficult. And it's, once you get through it though, you get to the search screen, but you only get to use the search screen one time. And then if you don't find the property you're looking for, your property, you go back and you have to go back through this security screen. So there's a way to get around this. They don't explain it, but there's a way to get around this. And that is, if you look on mynassauproperty.com, on the front page there's a toolbar, and at the end of that toolbar it says in very small letters, login. And that's what you want to use. You want to create an account first to use mynassauproperty.com, and then you'll be able to use it very efficiently and effectively. So you click login, and the first thing you want to do is, well, you'll see the screen to put in your username and password, but if you've never used this before, you have to go below that and you have to click create an account. Once you click create an account, it's going to ask you for your name and your email address, and you're going to have to put in a username and password that you'll have to remember, and then you click submit, and you've successfully created an account to use this website. So the first thing to do is you want to create an account to use this website. Once you have that account, you go back, you click login, and you put in your username and password. No more of these screens with these words or anything. Just put in your username and password. Once you do that, the search screen comes up. So you can put in the property, you put in the property's address, or you put in the section, block, and lot if you know it. And then that will bring up, first thing you want to look for is your property. So that will bring up your property. Once you get your property, you'll see a picture of it. Should be a recent picture, and you'll know it's your property. There's some very, very valuable information just from this screen. So the first thing you can see above the picture, it says View Correspondence. That's how you get to your notice of tentative assessment. So if you didn't get your notice of tentative assessment in the mail, you can get it online on this website. So you go to your property, you see your picture of your home, and you click View Correspondence. Another very, very useful thing that's on this page, next to View Correspondence, one over, it says Area Maps. If you click that, you'll get the county tax maps of your neighborhood with your property being the subject, and you'll see all these different properties around yours. So you could click any one of them, and once you click that, it'll bring up the screen for that property. And what's valuable about that is you can see the assessment for that property. And you can kind of hopscotch around just on these area maps. You just keep clicking maps, and you keep clicking different properties, and then you can start getting the picture of your neighborhood and near you, what the assessments are for homes that are similar to yours. So this is very useful in doing that kind of research. Also on the front page of this screen is the same thing that's on the notice of tentative assessment. It's the market value for this year, and you can also see the market value for the previous 3 years. At the bottom of the screen, you can actually click and you can see the whole history, the grievance history for this property going all the way back to 2002. And that's very useful. I mean, if you've lived in your property for more than 15 years, you actually should know what you've done and what grievances you filed and were settled and were successful or were not successful or might still be pending. But you can get the whole history of the property. So if you get to another property and you want to see, and you see that the assessment is much lower than yours, it probably is a good idea to also look at the grievance history of that property, and you can do that at the bottom of the screen. Now, right above the value and below the picture, this is how you get to your inventory, by clicking the Property Description tab. So once you click that, up comes the inventory for the property. And this is what you want to look at very carefully. You want to look at all the factors on that inventory, because like I explained, this is the basis for the assessments that they did. And actually, the assessment that the Assessment Review Commission will do when you file a grievance. So this inventory card is very, very important, and all the factors on it are important. But you can see that there is a location. It says location. They'll only put, mostly, they'll put negative location factors. There are actually location factors that add value to the property. One would be water view, and one would be waterfront. If you have waterfront property, you're not supposed to, add a tremendous amount of value to the property. So all of those location factors would be there. But if you have a negative one, it should be there. So if it's not there, you could put it on your grievance application, but you also want to go back to the Department of Assessment and have them correct it. You can also see things like where it says CDU. That stands for the condition, desirability, and utility of the property. So most of them say average. But if you know that your property has a cracked foundation, or part of the property is sinking into the ground, or something else like that that's more serious, and you have an engineering report to prove it, you want to get that fixed. The property should not be, at this point, assessed as average. If it's not, it could be fair, it could be poor. So you want to get that fixed. Also, it will show you the year the property was built, the model of the property. It'll tell whether or not there's central heat or central heat and AC. Up at the top on the second box, it says total living area. That's really the most important of all the factors. You want to make sure that that's correct. I mean, there are people that don't have a finished basement, where they're actually adding the entire square footage of the basement to their total living area. So that has had the effect of increasing their assessment all along. So you want to make sure it's the living area. It's not actually the number of rooms or bedrooms, it's the living area that's the most important factor. But it does tell you information about the rooms too, and it'll tell you about the garage, whether or not there's an attached garage or a second building for a garage or things like that. But everybody wants to look at, or everybody should look at their inventory. You need to do it to do Part D correctly. And again, on Part D, you could either leave the whole thing blank, you could just put in other facts, or if you find something wrong on your inventory, you want to put it in Part D. Don't give them any other information. It's not going to help your case. I mentioned a lot about comparing assessments in your neighborhood, which is important to do. It gives you a reference point for where your estimated value could be. And it also gives you some idea of the need to do this and the justification. But when you're comparing, we showed you on mynassauproperty.com by using the area maps and just jumping from property to property. When you're comparing, try to find homes that are similar to yours in style and in the same school district with the same attributes. So those are the first 4 parts of the application. It's the front page of the application. So essentially, you could see it's pretty straightforward. You just fill in Part A, B, and C, and if you have the need, you fill in Part D. And you could see also, you could get the Part D inventory on mynassauproperty.com. And also, you could see that part's optional. So on the back of the application, there are 3 more parts. And Part E is the most important part of this whole grievance process, because Part E has to do with the level of assessment. So let me begin by explaining that the attorneys are not just filing challenges to market values, they're also filing challenges to this level of assessment. So the county has been setting the level of assessment for their assessment rolls every single year at 0.25% since 2007. But the attorneys are basically challenging that by doing something called a ratio study. And they have been successful in this climate, and as actually the disparity between the frozen assessments and the rising market increases, they're becoming more and more successful every year at these challenges. And they're becoming very successful at having this level of assessment reduced, but just for their filers. It's not for the whole assessment roll. It's just for the people who are filing these grievances. So if you're filing this for yourself, pro se, what we want to do is to make sure we have a level playing field, that you're actually getting the same advantage that the attorneys are getting doing these extensive, what's called ratio studies. So number one, in order to ensure that you're going to get the same advantage the attorneys are getting, you have to fill in Part E of the application correctly. And it's very simple. The way to do it is they ask 5 things in this part. There's only one thing you want to fill in, and you want to fill in your estimate of full market value, and that's the exact same number you put in Part B of the application. So what you're going to do is just carry that number over from Part B into Part E and put it on the line next to little b. Now, it's very important not to put in any information about the other things. Now, this is the way the challenge to the county's level of assessment goes. And this is what's been happening. We're going to show you how it happens every year. But the way it works is the county has this assessment roll. It's been frozen since 2010, and every property that's a Class 1 property has a market value. So we're not going to show you all 365,000 properties. We're just going to show you 5 as an example. So property number 1 is valued at $500,000. The level of assessment's 0.25%, and the taxable assessed value on that $500,000 is $1,250. Property number 2 is valued at $650,000. The level of assessment's 1/4%, and the taxable assessed value is $1,625. Property number 3 is valued at $1 million. The level of assessment's at 1/4%, and the taxable assessed value is $2,500. Property number 4 is valued at $350,000. Level of assessment again is 1/4%, and the taxable assessed value is $875. And property number 5 is valued at $900,000. The level of assessment's at 1/4%, and the taxable assessed value is at $2,250. Now, when the county was doing annual reassessments every year, they were using very current sales. So normally, every year, they could justify, if that level of assessment was ever challenged, they could justify their market values, and they could justify that the level of assessment that they were using, 1/4%, was accurate. But since they've frozen the annual reassessments and the market has been increasing, the attorneys are basically studying the actual sales. And they're doing, as I mentioned, something called a ratio study. They're taking the taxable assessed value and comparing it to the sales price and finding out what the actual level of assessment should be. And the way that works is our property number 1, which was valued at $500,000, actually sold for $575,000. Now, that property was taxed on the assessment roll at $1,250. But when you look at the ratio, $1,250 to the sales price, $575, the level of assessment really is 0.217%. It's lower. So property number 2 was valued at $650, but it sold for $750. So the taxable assessed value is $1,625. The ratio of that taxable assessed value to the sales price is lower than 1/4%. It's 0.217%. Property number 3 was valued at $1 million. It sold for $988. So the $2,500 taxable assessed value is actually a little bit more than 1/4%. It's 0.253%. Property number 4 didn't sell, and property number 5 didn't sell. But you can see that what they did was they took the actual levels of assessment for the sales price, and they came up with an average, and they were able to show that the average is 0.23%. So that's what they actually do for every sale in the county. And then they go back to the Assessment Review Commission, and they said, look, we've studied all the sales, we've studied the taxable assessed values, and the actual level of assessment for all our cases should be lower. And you know what? The county actually settles that case, and they agree with the attorneys that that's how they're going to review all of their filings that they're filing for the year at a lower taxable assessed value. But what they're actually going to do is, they're actually, when these things are filed, they're actually going to come up with a new market value, and they're going to apply a lower level of assessment. So if you look at the first house, the $500,000 house, so remember, if nobody did anything from 2011 to 2016, that property is still valued at $500,000. Level of assessment is still at 1/4%, and the taxable assessed value is still at $1,250. You can see what happened, though, year by year to this house. So if somebody has a $500,000 house and they started filing every year, in almost every year they've been successful at getting a reduction. If they have the $500,000 house and they didn't do anything until 2016, they've been extremely successful. So we're going to show you that. You can see that by looking at this chart. So again, the property began at $500,000. The level of assessment was 1/4%, and the taxable assessed value was $1,250. So that was based on all the sales in 2009 on the assessment roll that was set January of 2010. Following the freeze, this home actually, if a grievance was filed, this home actually started increasing in value. But the attorneys did this big ratio study, and they basically were able to prove that for their cases, the level of assessment should be set lower at 0.22%. So this actually happened the following year. So the level of assessment was set at 0.22% for the value that the Assessment Review Commission came up with. Assessment Review Commission came up with a value of $510,000. They applied 0.22, and 0.22% of the 510 is 1122. So you could see that the 1122 is lower than the 1250. So what they do is they take the 1122, they send it back to the Department of Assessment. The Department of Assessment replaces the 1250 with 1122. Now they have a taxable assessed value, and now they have to convert that back to a market value. They do that by simply multiplying by 400. So that property drops from 500 to 448 on the assessment roll. If the person filed that year, if they did it pro se and they did it correctly, they would get the advantage of the 0.22. If they had a representative, they would get 0.22. The following year, the market increased again, so the property rose to 520. They did a big ratio study. They were able to prove that the level of assessment should be 0.20. So property rose to 520. They applied 0.20 to the 520. The taxable assessed value is now 1040. So 1040 goes from the Assessment Review Commission back to the Department of Assessment. They convert that back to a new market value just by multiplying 400. The new market value is 416. So you can see that the disparity between what the full market value, should be and is determined by the Assessment Review Commission, is becoming greater and greater for this one house, and what the adjusted market value is back on the assessment roll. The following year again, the level of assessment was dropped to 0.19, but the market value of the home rose to 550. They applied 0.19 to the 550. They came up with a value at 1045. So the 1045, that year, the 1045 is higher than the 1040. So for that 1 year, if somebody had been doing this all along, for that 1 year, they wouldn't get a reduction. Because as I said earlier, the Department of Assessment can increase your assessment. I'm sorry, the Assessment Review Commission can increase your assessment if you file one of these grievances. So the 1045 is actually higher than the 1040. So that 1 year, the assessment would just stay at 140 and the market value would be 416. If, however, the person hadn't filed until that year, until 2014, then the 1045 is lower than the 1250, so that would replace the 1250, and then the market value would be changed from 500 to 418. The following year, Assessment Review Commission found that this same property is now worth 570. They settled the cases at 0.18 based on the ratio study. And 0.18 of 570 is 1026. 1026 goes back to assessment. Multiply it by 400. They come up with a new market value for the property on the assessment roll, 410, 400. And in 2016, the market value rose to 600,000. So you could see in the 5 years that the actual market value of this property rose 20%. That's like an average countywide. So that's why I said when you're doing your estimated value, you want to make sure that it's at least 20% lower. So the 600,000 that year, the level of assessment was settled at 0.17, and the taxable assessed value of the property is now 1020. The 1020 replaces the 1026, and the property has reduced from 500 to 408. So that's basically what's been happening countywide. These reductions to the level of assessment are accurate. We found them on the Assessment Review Commission website for every property that's gotten a reduction up until 2016, 2017. So last year when I was at the Bryant Library, the county sent some representatives over to listen to what I was talking about, and then following that workshop, we saw that they changed the Assessment Review Commission website, and on the Assessment Review Commission website, you can no longer see these lower settled levels of assessment for 16, 17, or for the following year. You can't see it. It's actually happened, but you can't see it. But you can still see what's happened in the previous years. But anyway, that's basically what's happening in the county and happening, in the Assessment Review Commission, and that's what's driving lower market values in a rising market. So you can see that the property went from 500 to 600, but on the assessment roll, it went from 500 to 408. That's why properties are being reduced on the assessment roll. It's 90% about the level of assessment challenge, and maybe in some cases, maybe in 10% of the cases, it has to do with sales. But there is a section on the application for sales. Now, sales is the best evidence of market value. And there may still be some properties that are assessed at a higher value than the properties that are similar to theirs are selling for. So if you find those, we're going to show you how to look at the sales locator on the Assessment Review Commission website in a minute. So if you find those sales that are helpful to your case, you're going to want to put them on this grievance form. Also, again, if you know of sales that are helpful to your case, you're going to want to put them on this application. If you can't find sales, which is going to be hard for most of us to find sales that are going to prove that they're overvalued by market value, you can leave this whole section blank. But don't put sales in there that are going to prove that you're undervalued. Some people, they're doing this themselves. They think that they'll just put recent sales in. You only want to put sales in there that are going to help your case. Part G has to do with just signing the application. If the application is not signed and dated, it gets thrown out. It's not valid. So you have to make sure that you do Part G. But if you look at this 2-page application, it's pretty straightforward. It's Part A, B, and C. You have to know the market value you're challenging. You have to know your section, block, and lot, and property address, obviously. And you have to have a lower estimated value. For anybody, going further, it is a good idea for everybody to take a look at their property's inventory on mynassauproperty.com. But we're going to show you how to use the Assessment Review Commission website to file the appeal online, and also to get some important information, especially regarding sales. Anyway, before we do that website, if there are any questions or anything I said, yes?
Where do you get that multiple of 400?
The multiple of 400 is, in order to get back to the market value on the new taxable assessed value, the taxable assessed value is just, it's a fraction of the market value. It has to be 1/4 of 1%. So, it's just applying the multiple of 400 to that number. So then, basically, that number becomes 1/4 of 1% of your new full market value. It's just the math of it. It's the way to get back to the full market value of whatever the new taxable assessed value is. Because the taxable assessed value in the end, on the final assessment roll, the roll that they publish, it's always 1/4 of 1% of some new, market value. The market values, this is why the assessment rolls are constantly changing every year. And since 2010, the market values on the assessment roll have only been going down in almost every case. Sometimes they go up when people do work on their property. If you add a new room, or you do a lot of work on your property where they could add taxable value, that's a physical change. So the 6% cap, the 6% rule that assessments can't go up more than 6% doesn't apply in those cases. So there could be properties that go up by $100,000 or $200,000, but that would only be in the case where they've done extensive physical change. But mostly you see these market values going down if you compare previous years, in the last 5 years, to this year's roll. That's why, in the end, tax rates have been going up at the same time that the assessments are going down.
But if your valuations continue to drop, then you are obligated to try and find comparable or lower sales in your area? Isn't that rather difficult?
It's going to be very difficult to find lower sales, and as time goes on and the market keeps increasing, it's going to be close to being impossible. So what you want to take a look at, what's more important regarding your tax bills and your tax bill amount, is what is your market value assessment compared to other homes
In your neighborhood?
in your neighborhood. Now, that's not actually asked on these applications, and it's not asked for a reason, because it's not evidence of market value. It's just evidence that the county's assessment roll is a mess, is broken. But, you know, you want to have that information, especially if they call you for a settlement conference. But more importantly, you want to know what they're settling these cases at. Because whatever market value they apply for your property, you want the taxable assessed value to be at the lower fraction. So if they're settling these cases this year 0.16 or 0.15, you want them to tell you that. So you'll know what you're talking about when they call you. You know, they won't volunteer it, but you have to ask them. They're only going to, when they call you, they're only going to want to talk about market value, and they're going to want to try to convince you that your market value is already low enough.
On the website mynassaproperty.com, will you be able to get the market value of homes in your neighborhood?
Yes, you'll be able to get the market value of any property that you search.
And you can put that in Part F?
Part F has to do with the sales.
Sales, so
We're going to show you how to look up sales.
Yeah.
We didn't get to that yet. But you're only going to use sales if you find sales that are going to help your case, meaning lower. Sales that are lower than what you're valued for. Yes, in the back.
Hi, I've actually applied for this 2 years ago. And so the first year I got a pretty good reduction. The second year, they actually gave a small reduction. I rejected it, but they said I couldn't do anything further. Is there more I can do in terms of reducing?
Well, if you rejected it, then you had to follow that up with filing a SCAR appeal.
So I don't have to go to small claims.
Yeah, which year are we talking about? This just recently happened?
Yeah, past year. So
Right.
I rejected their reduction. It was small, but I wanted
Right.
more. But
Right.
they said since I didn't have any significant changes to the property, since the first time I had applied, they couldn't reduce it further.
Okay. Well, you do have the right to go to SCAR, so you do have to go to the county clerk's office and get a docket number. You have to pay a $30 fee to get that, but you have to do that in April of this year, and then they'll set up a SCAR date for you. So if you're confident that you could defend yourself, once you go into these SCAR hearings, the hearing officer gets to set the level of assessment. So it's not going to have anything to do with what happened between ARC and the certiorari attorneys. The hearing officers get to decide what the level of assessment should be for your case. They could, you know, change it case by case. They have the power to do that. So it may be to your advantage, it may not be. Also, you know, they're going to come in, assessment's going to come in with a lot of sales evidence regarding your property. So you have to have, you know, other evidence to show that you should be lower than what the Assessment Review Commission said you are. You know, it's tricky. I mean, if you don't feel confident in defending yourself, you can hire somebody to do it for you, but you are going to have to pay a fee. You know, I mean, in most cases, if you get a reduction, probably you want to take it for the year and then go on to the next year, you know, live to fight another day. Because you could just do it every single year.
How long does it take for them to notify you that you've had a reduction?
So a lot of the decisions start coming after the summer, starting in September, and following that to the end of the year. If you don't hear from them, you know, you don't want to find out that your decision was lost in the mail or something. You know, you need to follow up. If you file this online, you're going to be able to check the status of your appeal, so you'll have more information about what state your appeal is in. Yes.
have a signature on it? So
Yes, I'm going to show you that in a minute. So let me get into the website. And this is the main website for the Assessment Review Commission. So in order to get there, you go to the main Nassau County website, you go to departments, and you go to Assessment Review Commission. So almost halfway down on the main page, you could see it says ARROW, A-R-O-W. That stands for Assessment Review on the Web. So you want to click that. You want to click ARROW. Once you get to ARROW, ARROW has a menu. It's on the left, you'll see a list of things that you could click, and also in the middle towards the bottom you're going to also see things that you could click. The first thing you want to click if you've never used this website before is you want to register with ARC. So remember, you registered with mynassauproperty.com, you also want to register with ARC. And actually, as you're registering, you're putting in information that's part of the application. It's part of Part C, the representative part. So you click register with ARC, and then it's going to ask you to put in your name, your address, your phone number, your fax number. It's going to ask if you're representing yourself. It's going to ask for your email address. And then it's going to ask you to set up a username and password. So you have to do all those things. Most of this goes into Part C of the application. But the username and password is for using the website going forward, using the ARROW website. So you want to set up the complete registration, and then when you're all done, you click complete registration. And then you're ready to go back to the ARROW main menu. When you go back to the ARROW main menu, you could start looking at sales at that point. It could bring you to the sales locator. We're going to show you the sales locator as we're going through the application, but it's going to bring you immediately to Part F. If you want to begin filing an appeal online, you click File an Appeal. You've already registered with the website, set up a username and password, so you could use it. You could begin. One thing you should know when you're using this website, you have to go all the way through the application and finish it. You can't actually open it up, do 3 parts, and then save it and close, and then come back. It's not like filing a FAFSA form for applying to college for your children or grandchildren, where you could begin the application, save where you are, and then open it back up later, a week later, and start at the next section. This, you can't do that. You have to go all the way through the application and submit. So really what we tell people to do is do everything on paper, do the paper application, make sure you have all your basic information, make sure you've already searched mynassauproperty.com, and then click File the Appeal. So when you click File the Appeal online, it's going to actually bring up the application. And it's very, very similar to the paper. There is a section above Part A where you're actually going to have to indicate that you're using an AR1 form. Here they combine AR1, AR2, so this is for all 4 classes of property, Class 1, 2, 3, and 4. But you do click that. You have to click that you're using that AR1. So then you get to Part A, and the first thing it's going to ask you is your parcel ID. But here the computer wants you to enter the string of numbers that represent your parcel. So again, you can find it on your notice of tentative assessment. If you don't have it, there's a way to find it. There's a magnifier there, and you click the magnifier, and then it brings up a property search. So you could search the property either by the address or the section, block, and lot by putting in a section, block, and lot without the zeros, if you're not sure about the string and the way it should look. Either way, you want to find the property and bring it up and click the property, which is number 3. You want to click the parcel ID. That parcel ID that comes up is what you want to have in that box. And the way to do that is just to click it, and then it'll just carry the information over. But then you've input the parcel ID the way the computer wants it, the way the program wants it. Underneath that is a box for the owner's name. So again, if it's husband and wife, you put both. If it's one, you put one, whatever the name on the deed is. And if it's in a trust or a life estate, you put the name of the trust and the name of the life estate. Now, underneath that is Part B. That's where you put in your estimated value, which has to be lower. That should be 20% lower. In many cases, 35%, but it's got to be lower in order to file a valid grievance. So you put that in, and Part C has already been put in. That was the first thing you did when you registered with this website. So when you registered with the website, you actually completed Part C. Part D is the same thing as the paper. You only put in something in there regarding your inventory, regarding your property record card. If it's incorrect and it's been causing you to have a higher assessment, you want to put that information in here in Part D. But then again, you do have to go back to the Department of Assessment and have it corrected on the assessment roll. This is where you would also upload any other facts. So if you have documents that you want to upload with the application, you just upload them into other facts in Part D. Part E is the trickiest part of this whole program. So let me begin by telling you this whole program defaults to 1/4%. And there's a reason for that, because if you submit it that way, most likely the county doesn't have to settle your case at lower than 1/4%. And in most cases now, you're not going to win on market value. And if you're not going to win on a reduced level of assessment, most likely you won't win. So this program does default to 1/4%, and what you want to do is you're going to want to delete all the information except, just like on the paper application, you're going to want to submit it with your lower estimated value. And this is what you do when you get to Part E. First thing you do is click Calculate one time. When you do that, it's going to bring over your lower estimated value that you typed in Part B. It's going to bring it over to this part, into Part E, on that line next to little b. There's no way to type it in little b. You have to get it transported over, and the only way to do that is to click Calculate one time. Now you're going to see the other fields populated, and the correct level of assessment is going to say 0.0025. You're going to want to delete that. And the way you delete it is you click into the box that you want to delete the information, and you backspace the data out of it, and then you use your tab key, you hit tab to get out of the box. If you delete the data and then you click out of the box, the data comes back. It just keeps coming back. It just keeps repopulating, and you want to clean this up. So the only way to do that, you want to import your lower estimated value by clicking Calculate once, and then anything else that you see other than on that little b, you want to delete. And in order to do that, you have to click into the box, backspace out the data, and then tab out of the box. So once you've cleaned up Part E, then you're ready to move on to Part F. So we're going to show you Part F has to do with sales. So here you actually might want to look at sales if you're using the website. You do have to put in your string for your section, block, and lot in order for your property to come up as a subject. If you don't know, again, if you don't know that string or don't have it, there's a way to search for it by clicking the magnifier and then putting in most likely the address and then bringing up the property. And then as you bring up the property, you'll see the first thing you'll see is the actual string. You want to click that, and then that will bring the property into the sales locator. But you have to do that. You have to bring the property into the sales locator. Once you do that, you could search for sales. And sales are going to come up, and these are most likely the sales that the Assessment Review Commission will use when they're valuing, because they're the ones that have to do the reassessment of your property based on more recent sales of the last 18 months. So you'll see the sales that they're going to use. You might actually find sales that are going to help your case. So if you see any sales of the 5 that are going to come up that are going to help your case, you're going to want to use that. So you're going to want to click, just to save the sales. All the sales are going to come over to the application. And then only the ones you want to keep you can keep. The others you can delete. There's a way to delete the sales you don't want. If you happen to know of sales that are going to help your case that don't come up in this computer program, you could still input that information into this section on the application. So you could use their sales or you could use your sales, but the sales should be lower than what you're valued for. But in many cases, you're not going to have sales or find sales, so you would leave this section blank and go on to the last section of the application. The last section in the application, again, has to do with signing the application. So in order to sign it electronically, you're going to see some alphabetical letters come up, and you're going to want to type in those letters into the box. It's going to say, please retype the text. You're going to see some letters, and you're going to retype it into the box. And then you're going to scroll through your application, look at all the parts, A, B, C should be all done. D, if you have anything. E has to be totally cleaned up. Part F, only if you have sales. And G, make sure you put, the letters in. And then once you're all ready to go, then you click Submit Application. So the advantage to doing it online is, it's faster, and you also, you get an electronic receipt. So you actually have proof that your application was submitted. You don't have that unless you file by paper. You file in person and you get a copy of your application stamped. But you do get an electronic receipt. You can also follow your grievance application online on the arrow menu. And also, importantly, you can actually go back in. If you find out or think you made a mistake, or you think that there's more information that you want to add, the program allows you to go back in and do it again. You get a do-over. So you go back to the arrow screen, and underneath File and Appeal, you could click View or Change Your Appeal. And that'll bring up your application again. But once you start changing it, everything comes back, especially the information in Part A. So you actually have to do all the parts over again if you want to add something or revise it somehow. It's like doing it all over again. What's very important to know about doing it online is that at the end of the grievance period, it's almost impossible to get online and do it yourself because the attorneys are dominating the system. And in past years, the system has been in overload. As I said, many of these attorneys have, 21, 23, 25,000 clients. They don't, file until the end. They always file online. And they're filing thousands and thousands of these, and they're all doing it at the same time. So it's very, very hard for an individual to get into the system. We've heard, of complaints and of problems that people have had at the end. So don't wait to the end. If you want to do it online, don't wait till the end. Again, the application itself, the electronic application, is very, very similar to the paper application. You just have to be even more careful if you're doing it before you submit it, especially, regarding Part E. Anyway, as I, said before, you can file this grievance. Assessment Review Commission is set up shop at the Department of Assessment. They're at 240 Old Country Road. And if you're filing by mail and you're waiting till the end, make sure you get your envelope date stamped at the counter at the post office, just like paying your tax bills if you wait till the last day. If anybody has any questions regarding ARC or Arrow, we'll stay for questions. And also, I have, people with me from my office. Cheryl Lee is our office services supervisor in the middle. And I have Catherine Mott in the back, secretary to receive her taxes. So they're here to answer questions after we end. But again, I want to thank Roslyn or Roslyn Public Library for having me. And I want to thank all of you for coming today. And afterwards, if you have questions or problems, You can contact assessment, you can contact the Assessment Review Commission, you can contact us. We are very, very busy with tax payments between now, the end of January, and February 10th, so we may not be as available to help you with this until after February 10th, but we certainly are available. So again, thank you for coming, and if anybody has any further questions. Yes?
Just one question real quick. What's the mechanism for filing a grievance against your village tax?
Okay, so regarding villages, villages have their own assessment rolls and their own assessment deadlines and dates. I don't know, do you have the screen for the village? Okay, so you can see that there are some villages where, on this list, East Hills, Flower Hill, Roslyn, Old Westbury, Roslyn Estates, East Williston, Sands Point. So you can see that they have their own calendar. They publish their roll on February 1st. They actually have a grievance period and a grievance date, so it's February 1st to the 3rd Tuesday in February. And they have a grievance day at each one of these villages, these village halls. And that's, for those villages on the left side, the grievance day is February 21st. So that's all coming up. So the villages on the right side, those are 5 of the Great Neck villages. So only if you live in those 5 of the Great Neck villages, they have a different calendar. The villages on the bottom, North Hills, my village, Roslyn Harbor, and Baxter Estates, Plandome Heights, Muncie Park, Plandome Manor, etc. They use the county assessment roll. So if you reduce your assessment on the county assessment roll, that's the same roll the villages use for village taxes. But if you don't live in those bottom villages, and you certainly do have a different assessor, you have a different assessment roll, you have different values. In every case, probably the village market values are much higher than the county values. So you do have to file a separate grievance for village taxes.
And what is the village tax based on?
The village taxes, well, they use their own assessment roll, they create their own tax rates, and then what they're taxing you for are the village services that are not taxed, by the town or the county. So I actually pay for fire protection on my village tax bill. It's not on my general tax bill for the town. But, some villages have very high taxes. I know East Hills have a big park. Yes?
We have a high ranch, and Albertson, there's a lot of capes. How far do you look to compare? I mean, is it just Albertson, or is it?
No, I think you want to start by just looking in your school district.
Oh, okay.
Are you in Herrick's or?
Okay, yes.
Yeah. So you want to look at other high ranches in Herrick's. Start there. The assessment neighborhoods are actually larger than the school districts. When the county did this project, they created 23 assessment neighborhoods, and there were 59 school districts in Nassau County, so it almost encompasses, 1.5 to 2 school districts, but you want to start with your own school district. Okay, well, again, I want to thank everybody for coming out today. Thank you very much. And, we look forward to seeing you soon, and good luck.